Okay, so Jamaica's specialty coffee industry. Jamaica actually produces less than 0.1% of the global coffee traded in the world. So I know extremely tiny percentage. But as a traditional export crop, coffee is generally grown within the mountainous regions of the central and eastern sections of the island of Jamaica. And there are two main distinct coffee producing zones. You have the Blue Mountain Coffee Zone, which I know a lot of persons may know of the Blue Mountain Coffee. And then you have the non-Blue Mountain Zone, which is also called High Mountain Coffee, right? And the majority of the island's coffee farmers, they're actually located in the Blue Mountain Coffee Zone. So coffee is, one of Jamaica's top 10 export products, but the industry has experienced some decline over the last couple of years. One of the main features of the industry also is that it has undergone deregulation and privatization, where historically the state played a critical role in the development of the island's coffee industry, right? Through the provision of technical support and extension services, farmers used to receive subsidized farm inputs, the provision of social infrastructures, roads, schools, health centers. There used to be a higher investment in research and development and strengthening of cooperative organizations. But since the economy has, taken on some reforms, particularly from international financial agencies, the support for coffee growing communities has somewhat diminished. When you look at smallholder coffee livelihoods now, these farmers, they produce over 85% of the island's coffee. And oftentimes, the age of these farmers, they are very ageable persons. You even have coffee farmers in their 80s that are still plowing the land. So they usually farm on fragmented plots of land, which are around 2 to 3 acres. They usually engage in shade coffee, right? This is mainly for the lower elevation coffee farms. Usually farmers would intercrop bananas and plantains along with their coffee plants, right? So this will give them some sort of income diversification and really add or contribute to household food reserves. It is a male-dominated industry right throughout the coffee value chain, so not just on the farm, right? And the work that women, participate in, you do have some farmers as well as coffee pickers and coffee bean sorters in the factories. But also many of the women coffee farmers, they do have to manage that double burden of managing the farm as well as responsibilities in the home. Right. So looking at the challenges right now, so despite, producing this prestigious and luxury crop or commodity, Blue Mountain coffee, you have communities in this region where they remain underdeveloped with poor infrastructures, limited technology, and they do experience seasonal food insecurity. And some of the conditions that have really shaped this disabling environment include, the low farm gate prices that farmers receive, expensive farm inputs, limited on-farm technology. So like the use of irrigation is very limited to non-existent. Most of the farms are rain-fed. High maintenance costs of the farms, as well as limited support services. Challenges as it relates to the climate aspect, you have increased temperatures and frequent drought conditions. You have variable and unpredictable rainfall, right? Seasonal changes to the coffee crop calendar, decreased yield, increase in pests and diseases. So a lot of challenges are on the plate. And just stepping back a bit and looking at, climate change as it relates to the major coffee producers, particularly in Latin America. You find that, for example, in even Mexico and Central America, we're looking at the projected impact of climate change, it is going to be like substantial losses are projected in coffee growing areas by 2050, right? And since the 1960s, it is said that temperatures has risen by 1 degree Celsius, and rainfall has declined by 15%, right? When you look at Colombia, right, it is said that it will experience wetter and warmer weather, which kind of help to facilitate the increase in the coffee leaf rust, which is a disease affecting coffee, right? So you find that the rust is going to higher altitudes because it has become more warmer. In Brazil, it is expected that substantial losses in coffee are projected by 2050, right? So we're asking the question of, where is Jamaica? What about Jamaica? And looking at the future of Jamaica's climate, we find that climate model projections suggest that Jamaica will continue to experience a warming and drying trend. We'll have more very hot days, more very hot nights. And trust me, I have been experiencing it, right? Increased rainfall variability and a noticeable increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events like droughts and hurricanes. So even given all that projection, there still has not been an assessment of how these changes can affect coffee growing areas, especially since Blue Mountain coffee is a high value crop. How will climate change affect the future of this production, and what are the implications for industry stakeholders as well as for smallholder farmers? Right. So to address this knowledge gap, the objective of the research was to model current and future suitability for coffee production on the island over 3 shared socioeconomic pathway scenarios as seen on the slide. And it's for the near, mid, and far future, so 2021, 2040, and so on. And of course, here we look at, you see the parameters used for the model. So these are agroecological parameters, which are extremely important for the growth of the Arabica variety coffee. Right, so here the table shows changes in coffee suitability for each of the scenarios compared to the 2020 base model. And we find that coffee suitability in Jamaica decreased under all of the projected climate change scenarios, mostly by 5 to 10%, right? So for example, on a particular scenario, you'll have like 42% of the island experience a 5 to 10% decline in coffee suitability. Right, so here the maps are showing the differences in suitability under each of the scenarios for the near, mid, and far timescales compared to the initial base period in 2020. Right, so overall the suitability declines. Particularly, it is concentrated in the lower elevation areas of the non-Blue Mountain coffee producing zone, and we find that this finding is very substantial because the high mountain region, sometimes I switch back and forth, the high mountain is the same as non-Blue Mountain. It already operates at a higher temperature levels, right? So here you just find greater decrease or decline in coffee suitability going forward. Now, the implications of these findings, right? You find that as a climate sensitive crop, coffee plant health actually declines under higher temperatures, causing, yellowing of leaves and physiological abnormalities, especially in key moments of the plant's life cycle. We find that for example, the island, right, is projected to experience significant warming during the late wet season as well as during the dry season. So here we have the crop calendar for the Blue Mountain coffee and the non-Blue Mountain coffee zone. And, for example, we find that in the Blue Mountain coffee zone, you find that the fruit setting stage would be affected, right, by the extreme warming, while in the high mountain zone, you have the pre-flowering stage would be affected by increased warming. right? So you also find that certain agronomic practices used by farmers would also be affected by, these higher temperatures and changes in rainfall patterns. So activities such as planting new coffee seedlings, right? Fertilizing the coffee, applying, chemical applications, all of those depend on, having reliable temperatures and rainfall and seasonal patterns for coffee production, right? So actually, it has been said that, coffee farmers are already experiencing the adverse effects of these impacts. I've interacted with coffee farmers. They've showed me their burnt coffee cherries. They've mentioned that there have been delays in the bearing season and, of course, increase in pests and diseases, the coffee berry borer, the coffee leaf rust. So all of this has caused a disruption in their practices and, of course, has led to some food insecurity. And, with all of this as well, you find that it will affect the quality and quantity of the coffee produced, and even potentially affect the number of smallholder farmers who will be able to cultivate the crop in the future. Right. So looking at the seasonal food insecurity angle of these findings, and seasonal food insecurity experienced by farmers is really shaped by both climatic and non-climatic forces. For example, the increased temperatures and drought conditions not only result in a light coffee berries, and light coffee meaning that like the bean inside the coffee cherry has been affected, whether it has been dried out or a coffee berry borer went in and damage the bean. So that will often lead to income losses for the farmer, because the coffee processors would be purchasing less coffee, right? So another implication is that these coffee farmers, they have low coffee prices, or they receive low coffee prices, and sometimes the timing for their payments is very late. So these are also major contributors to the incidence of food insecurity, as these periods of hunger generally occur post-harvest, right, when funds have already been reinvested into the farm, or these periods of hunger may occur pre-harvest, when the funds are redirected to, cater to children or other household amenities and everything. So we find that, farmers continuously, they face decisions on managing on-farm requirements, household maintenance, and even, unexpected hardships, as each of these categories, they compete for the limited financial resources that they have. Um, Also drought, extreme events, drought and hurricanes, the recovery period often takes very long, sometimes years. And even with the use of personal savings, if savings are available, right, sometimes the loss in income will lead to poverty and increased vulnerability, particularly given the absence of, risk alleviating schemes like, insurance plans. Right. So considering the challenges, right, all of these challenges, and there are many, coffee producers, they have implemented a variety of adaptation strategies to ensure their survival and also the survival of their households, right? So these range from improving shade management practices, to combat the higher temperatures, even to abandoning their coffee plots, right? Like completely coming out of coffee production and pursuing other alternative livelihood activities such as animal husbandry. Some farmers, of course, they may intercrop subsistence crops, right? So fruits, vegetables, root crops to complement the coffee production. However, at times, these activities, they don't fully compensate farmers' ability farmers' ability um, to purchase, the necessary standard of farm food staples, right? Um, but there are also, other areas that they would venture into, such as cultivating food crops more tolerant to warmer temperatures. And just giving an example of research done by Zinger et al., right, where they modeled the suitability of some of Jamaica's most important food crops under future climatic conditions and, warmer temperatures. They found that minimal loss to suitability for crops such as bananas, yams, oranges, mango, and sweet potato, which Larissa you will find interesting. And also these results were also found by Riley et al., where again sweet potatoes showed an increased suitability under warmer temperatures or warmer scenarios. Yes. No, although the model showed a comparatively higher decline in the non-Blue Mountain coffee producing zone, coffee suitability within the high mountain region was also impacted, right? There have already been reports of traditional coffee growing areas, going higher into the mountains, shifting to higher altitudes. And according to a coffee advisory officer at one of the local coffee factories, basically saying that farmers are moving higher up into the mountains. And what they're going to do is cut down the trees, and, this is going to cause landslides and disasters. But also another thing to consider is that at higher elevations within the Blue Mountain regions, we have a UNESCO World Heritage Site, right? So with farmers possibly moving into these areas, it may cause some, contestation, so issues may arise among decision makers and stakeholders within the coffee industry and environmental institutions concerning, whose framing of adaptations take precedence under a new climate regime, right? So do you allow farmers to go higher up into the mountains, jeopardizing, the UNESCO World Heritage Site label? So these are decisions that, they will need to make. And also, for example, a quote from one of the coffee processors where he's saying, what 1 acre of Blue Mountain coffee can do for the Jamaican economy, like 1 acre of pine trees, they can't do anything. So if that's the mindset of this coffee processor, then, it may be a bit challenging if farmers continue to move up further into the hills. So these economically valuable spaces, such as the Blue Mountain producing region, they will become contested under climate change. Right. And continuing on the politics of adaptation, when we consider the local and international prestige of and the value assigned to Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, we find that like this Blue Mountain coffee space, it has the power to influence decisions, right? So according to another coffee processor, he's saying that Blue Mountain coffee is the Usain Bolt of coffee. And we all know who Usain Bolt is, right? The fastest man alive. So that's the prestige assigned to Blue Mountain coffee. So when you think of this space, right, it provides this Blue Mountain coffee space, it provides a level of security for the industry stakeholders, right? But now climate change is coming in to disrupt this security, right? And for a farm level adaptation measure, one of the responses by farmers that has emerged to combat, the burden of climate change is a growing preference for more robust coffee varieties such as the Arabica geisha, right, and other numbered hybrid coffee varieties. So farmers, they acknowledge that these varieties, the geisha and the numbered varieties, they are highly productive, drought tolerant, disease resistant, and comparatively less costly to cultivate than the Arabica typica variety, right, which is more sensitive to environmental changes, more sensitive to the pest and disease, more sensitive to the increased temperatures. But the representatives of the regulatory body that controls the industry, as well as some of the coffee processors, right, they are against the cultivation of these type of numbered varieties because they're saying that there isn't a market preference for it, right? The market prefers the Arabica typica variety, regardless if it is comparatively more susceptible to the coffee leaf rust and difficult to maintain, right? So they do have, you know, the idea of protecting the geo-branding status of the Blue Mountain coffee and the taste of the coffee, because there is a comparative advantage, right? So we find that the variety that secures the market for these large coffee processors has really become an insecurity for the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, and it really sheds light on who determines the correct form of adaptation and whose framing should take place, and which pathway should be privileged. I'll just move quickly here, just some quotes of coffee processors. They're saying that the geisha the Arabica geisha coffee has a different taste profile, regardless of it being resistant. So farmers shouldn't invest in that, but the farmers prefer it because it's more resistant and it's providing an income for their household. Right. So just a quick overview on the strategies moving forward. Right. It is said that Jamaica's coffee industry, it remains ill prepared for the challenges associated with climate change. And of course, this has had like a multiplier effect, of course, affecting food security of coffee farmers. And just a summary of the quote here, where a coffee processor is saying that they acknowledge climate change is happening and the effects that it has been happening on the industry, but there is no plan B, right? So if no adaptation doesn't take place, then that's it. They don't have a job. In one of the regulatory corporate plan that has been developed, the strategic objectives for climate change adaptation were absent. However, they did have some activities or proposed activities that could benefit farmers under climate change, right? Increase temperatures and so on. So some of those activities include, increasing training for farmers and increasing research for more resilient coffee varieties that suits the taste of the market and of the regulators and of the coffee processors, right? And of course, more developing action plan for pest and disease management. So wrapping up some of the recommended strategies for the future, where we find that, irrigation systems and greenhouse technology may be possible options, as water supply is key to maintaining coffee bean quality. However, the high costs of these technologies are likely to exclude smallholder farmers. So there needs to be strategies in place to increase access to on-farm technology. And of course, developing a holistic climate change action plan or adaptation strategy specifically for the industry, by engaging stakeholders at multiple points in the value chain, addressing on the line. One more minute. Yes, I'm wrapping up. This is the last. um, yes, multiple points of the value chain, addressing underlying institutional and socioeconomic barriers. So being more holistic in their plan, and of course investing in research and the gender dynamics of the industry. And we find that looking at the gender dynamics, the contribution of rural women is extremely important. And in the coffee space, it often goes unnoticed, right? Generally, countries that produce coffee, they do have wider gender gaps. And of course, the Jamaica Women in Coffee, which is the local chapter for the International Women's Coffee Alliance, we focus on building the capacity of women in the coffee space so that they can participate fully within the coffee value chain. And this is just a wrap up of how agriculture is still remains very important for the sector and for food security. The decrease in coffee suitability is significant and it carries extreme implications, right? And there are certain approaches that we need to take, shift from being fragmented to being more holistic, invest in research and gender dynamic, research and gender disparities, increasing research in that area, and of course developing assessment and plans that takes into account gender and creating an overall enabling environment for the industry. That is it for me. Thank you so much.
Explora más contenidos de tu interés. No olvides suscribirte a nuestro canal.